Hey, what's going on, guys? I'm Gaming here, back into the video. Today's episode, we're taking a quick look at how to play Enhancement Shaman for Season 3 Mythic Plus for the War Within. This is going to be a beginner's guide, and the idea behind this guide is to get you up to at least a plus 10 in Mythic Plus. So if you are a seasoned veteran at WoW, you know a lot about Enhancement Shaman, you're looking for more of an advanced guide, this is probably not going to be the video for you. Mainly going to be for people returning to Enhancement Shaman after a long break or brand new players. With that being said, let's go ahead and get started. Let's talk about how Enhancement Shaman even works. So Enhancement Shaman they work off mana, they work off health, but you're really not too worried about mana for the most part. You're really worried about something called a Maelstrom stacks, right? And as we attack targets, you can see we build up something here called a Maelstrom weapon. So just to read this out, your next damage and healing spell has its cast time reduced by 100%, damage increased by 200%. I'm gaining stacks as we talk, and healing increased by 170%. So the idea of Enhancement Shaman is to build up these stacks and then to spin them. Now you see I have this sort of glowing icon here, and this means that this is a good time to spin those Maelstrom stacks. So since I'm at 8 stacks, if I cancel that, you'll see the icon goes away. So when the icon pops up, that's just telling you, hey, you have a bunch of Maelstrom stacks, spin that on something. Now, one of the things you want to avoid is overcapping on Maelstrom. So that Maelstrom actually caps at 10 stacks. So if at any point in your rotation you see that you're sitting at 10 stacks, that means you are currently wasting damage. So try to never sit at 10 stacks, always spin them as quickly as you can. Or not necessarily as quickly as you can, just make sure you're not sitting at 10 stacks with your Maelstrom. So let's go over some of our basic abilities first. So we're talking about Flame Shock. So Flame Shock's on a 4-second cooldown, and not too much to know about it. You send it out, it does ticking damage to a specific target, and we can actually spread that with something called our Lava Lash. So Lava Lash here, you hit with your offhand weapon, and if you strike a target that already has Flame Shock on it, you can see Flame Shock has now spread to all these different target dummies for us. So typically what you want to do is wanting to Flame Shock at least once, and then a Lava Lash behind that, and you can see we're not having to cast Flame Shock anymore because our Lava Lash is refreshing the duration on Flame Shock. So we'll cover that a little bit more once we get into like rotation, but that's kind of how those two spells work. We also have something called Primordial Wave. So this specific build, we're running Stormbringer, as you can see. Again, these talents are going to be in the description of the video if you want to check those out. But we're running Primordial Wave in this specific build. And it's on a 30-second cooldown. This blasts all targets affected by your Flame Shock within 40 yards. So you want to make sure that Flame Shock is applied before pressing Primordial Wave. So a typical opener is going to be Flame Shock into a Lava Lash into a Primordial Wave. So going back to Primordial Wave, you're going to strike all targets that have Flame Shock on them. And the Primordial Wave also generates 5 stacks of Maelstrom weapons. So you're going to be careful. You really don't want to Primordial Wave while you're sitting on like 8 or 9 stacks of Maelstrom weapon. You're going to be wasting charges. So something to kind of keep in mind there. And then you see we have a couple talents here that stem from Primordial Wave running Splintered Elements. So Primordial Wave gives us a huge haste buff, and that haste buff increases based on target count. And then down here, we're running Primordial Storm. So after we use our Primordial Wave, it transforms into something called Primordial Storm for 15 seconds. And you typically want to use Primordial Storm when you're sitting at 10 stacks of Maelstrom weapon. And the reason for that is, if we just read this out, you strike with the different elements, doing a whole bunch of damage, and unleashes a lightning bolt or a chain lightning at 150% effectiveness. It deals reduced damage beyond 5 targets. So you want to pair this with Maelstrom at 10 stacks, and the reason you want to do that is due to our Legacy of the Frost Witch here. So consuming 10 stacks of Maelstrom weapon will reset the cooldown of Storm Strike and increase the damage of your physical and frost abilities by 50% for 8 seconds. Now, there's a little bit more sauce behind this actually. We actually have our Doom Winds as well, which we're not talked about yet. So just know for now, we want to Primordial Storm at 10 stacks of Maelstrom weapon. Okay, and there's a little bit more to this, right? So we have Doom Winds, 1 minute cooldown. You press it, it does sort of this Doom Wind area effect around you. I kind of show what that looks like really quick. You can kind of press it. You see you have these winds kind of around you now. And we get a pretty special effect from this. So we'll open up Doom Winds again. So increases your chance to activate Wind Fury weapon by 200% and the damage from Wind Fury weapon by 10%. So it's very important to pair your Doom Winds up with your Primordial Storm, right? With that Primordial Wave. So you're going to get this every 30 seconds. So every other Primordial Storm, you could sync up with a Doom Winds, and you want to do that. And the reason you want to do that is if we go back to Primordial Storm here, Primordial Storm deals Flame Strike, Frost Strike, and Storm Strike damage, and each of those has an increased chance to proc our Wind Fury weapon on our main hand. Now, we're not really talked about Wind Fury weapon yet, but if you're new to Enhancement Shaman, you get buffs that you put on your weapon. You have a Wind Fury and you have a Flame Tongue weapon. So what this is saying here is that 200% increased chance to proc Wind Fury weapon is just referring to this Wind Fury weapon buff that you put on your main hand. So we'll cover that directly after this, but just know you want to be using Primordial Storm at 10 stacks of Maelstrom weapon, and you want to pair it up with your Doom Winds, because each cast of Primordial Storm has that increased chance to proc Wind Fury weapon. So hopefully that makes sense. We'll talk about that a little bit more once you get into the rotation. Let's quickly jump over to our buffs. So we have a Wind Fury weapon here. Bring that up. So Wind Fury weapon, without confusing you too much, Wind Fury weapon used to be able to be put on a main hand or an offhand, but the way it works now is when you press this button, it will always go on your main hand. So this has a 30% chance to trigger 3 additional attacks, dealing a whole bunch of physical damage. And then Wind Fury causes each successive Wind Fury attack within 15 seconds to increase the damage of Wind Fury by 50%. So it just kind of buffs itself. So that will go on your main hand, and then you want to be putting Flame Tongue weapon on your offhand here. This will always go on your offhand no matter what. It just causes your attacks to deal more fire damage. So that's kind of the triage here. That's kind of the synergy between Frost Witch, Doom Winds, and Primordial Storm, Primordial Wave. Very important to understand how those three work together. Okay, so we talked about a lot of stuff already. Let's go ahead and move on to our Crash Lightning. So Crash Lightning here, on a 9.6 seconds cooldown. Let's pull it up here. I feel like it's a little bit easier to read. Electrocutes all enemies in front of you, dealing a whole bunch of nature damage. Hitting 2 or more targets enhances your weapons for 12 seconds, causing Storm Strike, Ice Strike, and Lava Lash to also deal damage to all targets in front of you. Damage reduced beyond 6 targets. So whether this works is this kind of like a buff that you're trying to maintain. So I'll go into these target dummies here, and I will go ahead and Crash Lightning. And you see I get this buff for 11 seconds. And every single Ice Strike, Lava Lash, and Storm Strike that I press now is going to deal AoE damage, right? So this is just a buff pretty much that you're wanting to always maintain. Not really used as single target, but mainly used in AoE, right? So maintain the buff, and it's going to turn your other spells into AoE spells. So let's go ahead and talk about Storm Strike now. So Storm Strike is going to be one of your main filler spells. So this is where our hero talents actually come into play, is through Storm Strike. Just to read it out, Storm Strike has a 50% chance to generate 1 stack of Maelstrom weapon. You press it, it does damage. It has 2 charges. Not too much to know about that. But what is important to know is how it works with our Tempest here. So every 40 Maelstrom weapon stacks spent replaces your next lightning bolt with something called Tempest. This has a 1.6 second cast, and this does a bunch of single target damage and a bunch of AoE damage. And of course, this will consume your Maelstrom stacks, and this can be, instant cast when you're at full Maelstrom stacks. So let's take a quick look at what that looks like. So we'll go ahead and we'll just start kind of attacking this dummy here. And let's start kind of building towards those Tempest stacks. And again, the way that you build those Tempest stacks, you have to spend Maelstrom, right? So we'll spend some Maelstrom here, keep building. Okay, now we have a Tempest proc. You can see it's right here. Lightning Bolt is replaced by Tempest. And you can see it's right here on our Shift 3. So when we press this, this is going to consume our Maelstrom stacks. And it's going to deal a ton of damage. So you kind of see it's glowing here. It's saying, hey, go ahead and press me. This is a huge portion of our damage, and it's something that you just need to make sure that you're reacting to. Now, this replaces your Lightning Bolt icon. So if you go to your spellbook, you're not going to see anything for Tempest. It's just going to, you see my Lightning Bolt got replaced with Tempest. Wherever your Lightning Bolt is where your Tempest is going to appear. So here we go. We got it back again. We'll go ahead and press it. And you can see it just did a ton of damage to all of those targets. Then in terms of your hero talents, there's really nothing else you need to be super familiar with. A lot of this is just kind of passive damage that kind of comes through Tempest. One thing you do need to be at least aware of is something called Lightning Rod here. So as you cast your Chain Lightnings, you can kind of tab target through the different mobs, and you can apply something called a Lightning Rod to them. So we'll come in here and we'll start doing some damage. And we'll build up some Maelstrom stacks, and we'll cast our Chain Lightning here. And you see this target now has a Lightning Rod on them. And if I target this dummy, this target dummy has its own separate Lightning Rod. So what you can do is you kind of tab target between the different dummies, and you can build up more Lightning Rods to spread those out and deal increased damage. Just a minor way to kind of pad the stats, and something you will want to be aware of. Yeah, let's go ahead and move on to what we're going to talk about next. Let's talk about Ice Strike. So Ice Strike here, we'll go to our spell book. So Ice Strike is on a 12-second cooldown. Strike your target with frost damage and increase the damage of your next frost shot by 100% and generates 1 stack of Maelstrom weapon. So Ice Strike is great because this will actually generate a ton of Maelstrom stacks with us. It's really just used for Tempest cycling. Both Storm Strike and Ice Strike, use them when you can as fillers. Their only main really big benefit is generating Maelstrom weapon and just providing us procs. Just the raw damage from them is nothing too crazy, right? Then yeah, I guess I should have talked about Lightning Bolt. You're gonna use Lightning Bolt in single target scenarios, one of our filler spells, and then you'll be using Chain Lightning in AOE scenarios. Last thing I'm gonna talk about here is our Ascendants. So Ascendants, just kind of read it out. Transform into an Air Ascendant, dealing a whole bunch of damage, reducing the cooldown and cost of Storm Strike by 60%, and then transforming your auto attacks of Storm Strike into wind attacks, which bypass armor and have range. And then while Ascendance is active, we're going to be generating 2 Maelstrom weapon stacks every 1 second. So Ascendance gives us this extremely powerful ability called Wind Strike. So when you are within your Ascendance, the only button you should be pressing is your Wind Strike. So we'll go into Ascendance, show you what that looks like. And you can see that our Storm Strike has transformed into Wind Strike. And when you are within this Ascended phase, regardless of any sort of procs, whatever, it does not matter. The only button you should be pressing is Wind Strike and then Tempest whenever it procs. And we're using these Wind Strike procs to generate a lot of Maelstrom. And that Maelstrom it's using is actually through Thorum's Invocation here. So during your Ascendance, Wind Strike consumes up to 5 Maelstrom weapon charges and discharges Lightning Bolt or Chain Lightning 100% effectiveness at the enemy. It's going to be whichever one you most recently use. And then when available, it will instead discharge Tempest at 100% effectiveness. So your Wind Strike is actually going to spend your Maelstrom for you, and it's going to use your Tempest for you as well. So let's go ahead and we'll just build up some random stacks here. We'll just kind of mess around for a minute. We'll build up some stacks here. Okay, we're at 10 Maelstrom stacks. Let's go ahead and pop our Ascendants, and then let's watch our Maelstrom stacks as we spam this. Right, so you can see that we are using our Maelstrom stacks as we get them. We're using our Tempest. It used our Tempest for us right there. And everything just kind of happens pretty passively just by spamming your Wind Strike. Yeah, so that's one thing to note is when you're in Ascendance, that's the only button you press is your Wind Strike. Okay, let's go ahead. I think we talked about pretty much everything in terms of like the core rotation. Let's go ahead and talk a little bit about your opener. So your opener is going to be the following here. And this is kind of what we talked about earlier, right? You went to Flame Shock, into a Lava Lash, into a Primordial Wave. Right, that Lava Lash is going to spread out our Flame Shock to all of our targets, and then we can Primordial Wave behind that to get that burst damage from all the targets that are affected by our Flame Shock. Up next, we have Doom Winds, Crash Lightning, and Ascendant. So you want to pair all 3 of these up. Again, Crash Lightning is a buff that we want to keep up at all possible times, and you want to overlap your Doom Winds with your Ascendants, because all those Wind Strikes that we're casting are going to give us more Wind Fury weapon procs during our Ascendance window if we overlap it with Doom Winds. So very important to overlap those. Wind Strike, like we said, on cooldown. You also want to line up your Primordial Storm right after your Primordial Wave. It turns into Primordial Storm, and you have to pair that with your Doom Winds window, kind of like we talked about earlier, going to give us more Wind Fury weapon procs. And then from here, you'll go into your single target rotation. Or AOE, right? Just depending on which you're in. So that's kind of like the general Mythic Plus opener. So we'll take a quick look at the opener. We'll go ahead and we'll start out. We'll give it just a second here on our Primordial Wave. And then one thing that I did miss earlier is whenever we go into our Primordial Storm, your Primordial Storm actually does not last as long as your Ascendance window does. So you'll have to sneak in that Primordial Storm before your Doom Winds expires and before that Primordial Storm proc basically disappears. So even if you're within your Ascendants, you will use 1 global to get that Primordial Storm off, and then you go back into Wind Strike spams. So take a look at the opener here. We'll go into a Flame Shock, into a Lava Lash, Primordial Wave, Doom Winds, a Crash Lightning, and Ascendants. We'll go into some Wind Strikes. We'll go into a Primordial Storm, and then just straight Wind Strike spams. And again, Wind Strike here will be casting Chain Lightnings for us, spending that Maelstrom. And if a Tempest does proc, it will spend. You can kind of see it right there. It kind of lagged, but it did spend that Tempest proc for us as well. Very nice that Wind Strike just kind of handles everything for us in that really big burst window. And that's your general opener right there. Okay, single target's going to look something like this. So we'll go into a Flame Shock and then into a Primordial Wave. We want to do that, right? We want to get Flame Shock on the target. We want the burst damage from Primordial Wave. Then you also want to trigger that Splintered Elements, right? We want to get that haste buff. From here, you want to kind of focus on that trio that we've been talking about this whole time. The Wind Strike with Doom Winds. Really, the trio here is a Doom Winds with Primordial Storm with Ascendance. You're going to try to get those three to line up every single time that you can. And then once you do that, right, you're going to be using that Wind Strike on cooldown. Right, make sure that you're getting that Primordial Storm off before you do lose your Doom Winds. And again, the idea of this is to maximize our Wind Fury weapon procs. So step 8 here, we're going to cast Maelstrom at 8, our Maelstrom weapon spinners at 8+ stacks. It's a single target, so we'll be using Lightning Bolt over Chain Lightning. And then, of course, just whenever we get a Tempest proc, we're going to be using Maelstrom weapon stacks on that. From here, we'll be using our Storm Strike. If at 2 charges, we'll go into a Voltaic Blaze. So we're not talking about the spell yet. It's going to be right here. So Tempest, a Lightning Bolt, Chain Lightning have a chance to make our next Flame Shock become Voltaic Blaze. This basically just transform your Flame Shock and like a burst damage spell, and it generates some Maelstrom weapon stacks for us. So want to be using that whenever that does proc. If you're not stacked on Storm Strike charges, then you want to Ice Strike, because Ice Strike is actually going to generate more Maelstrom and then something like Storm Strike. So Ice Strike has priority over Storm Strike unless we're at 2 charges. Then we'll go into a Lava Lash once our Ice Strike and Storm Strike charges are depleted. And then from here, we'll just be using Lightning Bolt with our Maelstrom weapon stacks at 5+. And then we can alternate between Frost Shock and Flame Shock if there's nothing else to press. I will say it's very rare that you come into a situation where you're ever really casting too much Frost Shock unless it's like a movement phase or something like that. Okay, then we have our AOE priority here. So pretty much same thing, especially in terms of like the opening sequence here. Pretty much everything from steps 1 through all the way down through 7 is going to be the exact same. So nothing changes here between single target and AOE. Right, we're going to make sure that we're getting our Flame Shock up. We're going to spread that with a Lava Lash. That is actually a little bit different from the single target rotation. We are incorporating a Lava Lash into just sort of like base AOE. Big Primordial Wave on all of our Flame Shock targets. And then we go into that Doom Winds, Primordial Storm, Ascendance window. When to pair those 3 up and make sure that you are spamming Wind Strike again as much as you possibly can during that Ascendance window. A little bit of change here in step 7 as well. We are replacing Lightning Bolt with Chain Lightning instead. And we'll be using Maelstrom weapon spinners at 7+ stacks rather than 8+ stacks. And we'll, of course, prioritize any sort of Tempest procs over Chain Lightning. The other thing that's a little different as well is we are working Crash Lightning into our AoE. So once you kind of go through so that main priority sequence up here, then we could go into our Crash Lightning. And it kind of makes sense because Crash Lightning is actually buffing the spells below it rather than above here. So that's going to turn our Storm Strike, Ice Strike, and Lava Lash into AoE abilities. You're going to use that Voltaic Blaze whenever we do get a proc of that. We'll be using a Chain Lightning at 5+ Maelstrom weapon stacks, and then filling with Storm Strike, Ice Strike, and a Lava Lash. And then this is another difference, is that Storm Strike actually does take priority over Ice Strike in AoE versus single target. But overall, your goal is to keep both of these on cooldown as much as you possibly can. And then finally, we will be using Flame Shock and Frost Shock during any sort of movement phases. All right, guys, that's the end of this video. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. See you in the next one. Peace.